Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019 Advanced. In the last couple of sections we've looked at sorting and filtering, and in this section we're going to look in detail at grouping. Now once again I'm going to assume that you've done some grouping before, but let me just recap one or two basic features. First of all, with the auto filter facility enabled, you can perform grouping using grouping options that are available from the drop down in each column header in a view where you have a table. So for instance, on the duration column here, group by, I can group by duration or I can group by weeks. If I say group by duration, you can see that the grouping is by the actual value in the duration field. But the duration here has 0 days. So here are the 4 tasks with 0 days. Here is the task with 10 days. Here are the 2 tasks with 25 days, and so on. Now in this sense, grouping is a special kind of sorting because although you still finish up with things sorted into sequence, you also finish up with totals or rolled up values that are determined by the particular sort of the grouping that you've performed. So let me explain that in a little more detail. If you take this group, duration 25 days, we have 2 tasks with a duration of 25 days. Task 15, database implementation, and task 19, test script. Those are grouped together because they have the same duration. But the duration for the group is 35 days because that is the duration which covers both of the tasks that are in that particular group. If you look over at the bars on the right, you can see that there is a little sort of summary taskbar there corresponding to that group, and it shows a duration of 35 days covering task 15 and 19. So that's one way of looking at it. Grouping is a special kind of sorting. Now the actual groups that are available once again depend on the data type. So if I go back to duration and down to group by, and this time I'm going to say group by weeks instead of duration. And you can see that I've got 1 week, 3 weeks, 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and so on. Note that where a particular number of weeks has no tasks in it, that particular group is skipped altogether. Now if I undo the grouping on the duration field, and look at, say, start and group by, I can group by the actual date, the months, the weeks, the quarters, etc. So if I group by months, I've got the ones that are starting in April, the ones that are starting in June, July, August, again, so on and so forth. So that's using the grouping settings on the column headings. Let's remove the grouping there. So I'm going to go back to start. I'm going to say no group, and also duration, it's already taken that one off, so we're back to where we started from. Now let's look instead at the grouping options in the data group on the View tab. And let's start with one of these standard groups, complete and incomplete tasks. That divides the tasks in the schedule into 3 groups. So we have complete 0%, which means no progress reported at all. Complete 1% to 99% basically means in progress. We have at least 1% of progress recorded. And then complete 100%, and that means the task is now complete. Note once again that we don't see any summary tasks there. And there is actually an option at the bottom of that group by drop down to maintain hierarchy in current group. And now you can see that for each of the tasks in each of the groups, the hierarchy that surrounds the task is now showing. So for instance, if you take something like this, task 10, analysis and design, you can see which part of the hierarchy it's in. And of course, design sign off, much higher up the Gantt chart at the moment, is in the same hierarchy. But the hierarchy there is repeated as necessary to show you where each of the tasks appears in the actual ungrouped schedule. So let's take a look at this particular grouping. I'm going to click on the drop down next to group by, and we're going to go to more groups. And we've clicked on complete and incomplete tasks. Now, I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that you can create your own group for tasks or resources. And once again, I suggest that you don't change the standard ones, that you at least keep a backup copy if you do. And that you can create a new group either from scratch using the New button or by copying an existing group and using that as a starting point. Now we're going to create a new group in a moment, but first we're going to take a closer look at complete and incomplete tasks by clicking on the Edit button. Now you can see here that this particular group is grouped by a particular field, so percentage complete in this case. The field type is task and the order is ascending. Now in the middle here, the formatting of how the summary information appears is shown. We can specify a font, so in this case Arial 8-point bold, a cell background colour, and also a pattern if we so desire. And we'll use this when we create our new group for resources in just a moment. One other very interesting point here is this, the define group intervals. Now with this particular group, this standard group, the group intervals are defined as 0, 1 to 99 and 100. And where you're dealing with any kind of numerical field, and in this case of course percent complete is a numerical field, it involves a value between 0 and 100. You can set up these group intervals in whichever way you like. Again, I'll demonstrate that to you in just a moment. So the grouping here on percentage complete is in 3 categories, 0, 1 to 99 and 100. And click on OK. And let's just click Save. And let's return this particular Gantt chart to No Group. Now let's jump across to the resource sheet and let's do some grouping over there. Now the grouping that I'm going to create here is actually going to be at 2 levels. At the first level, I'm going to group by external and internal resources. And then with each of those groups, I'm going to group by standard rate. Now, I appreciate that to some extent, standard rate won't quite be right here because the contract consultant doesn't charge a standard rate. The contract consultant here has a cost per use, but let's do the grouping anyway. So let's go up to group by and down to more groups. And I'm going to say new. And the first field I'm going to group by is group. The field type is resource, and note that when you're creating a group for resources that you can only use resource field types. Now to some extent there is a sort of a way around this, or should I say that there is a way that you can look at tasks using resource fields and vice versa, but that's not strictly true, and I'll explain that to you more in just a moment. So at this first level, we're grouping by the group field, and then we're going to group by standard rate. Now for standard rate, we're going to define group intervals, and when you define group intervals, the options that you are offered depend on the data type of the field that you're using for that grouping level. Now in the case of standard rate, the options we're given are each value. So we could type in a succession of values to use for the groups, or we can divide the available range up into intervals. So I'm going to divide the available range up into intervals starting at 0 and going up in group intervals of 25. So we're going to click the drop down and select interval. We're going to start at 0 and we're going to go up in 25s and click on OK. So now there are 2 levels of grouping that I'm going to use, but just to illustrate this point about grouping, let me put a 3rd level in here. I'm going to get rid of it again in a moment. This is purely for demonstration. So supposing I put in here percentage of work complete. If I then say define group interval, in the case of define interval for percent work complete, my options are each value, interval, or these default intervals for any percent type value. So that's how in the example that you saw earlier on in the section, we got those intervals of 0, 1 to 99 and 100. So exactly what you see there will depend totally on the field and the field type. Now, I'm not going to do this. Let me just remove that third level. Now I'm back at the grouping level and I'm going to change this. I'm going to change the heading for the group level and I'm going to go for a different font. And let's scroll down. I think I'm going to go for Imprint Empty Shadow. And we're going to have that font size of 10. And for the cell background color, I'm going to change that color to something else, so a green. And we're going to have a pattern, so let's just have something like that. So there we are. Click on Save. I'm now going to give my group a name, so up here I'm going to call it DA Group and click on Save, and now I'm going to apply. And that looks pretty horrible, but hopefully you get the idea. So that's a custom grouping. And just while we're looking at this, I should point out that where it is appropriate to come up with some kind of aggregation in other columns, it will be done when you apply this grouping. So for instance, the max units column just here, it's totaled the max units for group external and for group internal. And then not only are they totaled for the outer level of groups, but for the inner level as well. And so for instance, for group internal, how many of the resources have their standard rate in a range 25 to 50? Well, it is 4. Now let's return to something that I said I would come back to, and that is I'm just going to remove this group for the moment. So let's go to Group By and we'll say No Group. We're now looking at the resource sheet without any grouping or filtering applied. And I'm going to go back into the group that I just created. So down into More Groups, DA Group, and Edit. And I'm going to change something very small in my definition. I'm going to check this box, Group Assignments, Not Resources. Now what this will do is instead of grouping the resources on the resource sheet, it will group their assignments. And what this means, in effect, is that I will see which tasks have these resources assigned to them. So I'll see the tasks, for instance, which have external resources assigned, and with standard rates for those resources in each of the categories. So I'm going to save my new definition. Now I'm not going to apply it right now, I'm just going to click on Close. And I'm going to jump from Resource Sheet to Resource Usage. And I'm going to apply my group, DA Group. And this time, instead of seeing the resources, you're going to see the assignments to tasks grouped in that way. So for instance, Group External, the lowest external rate we have is $0 to $25. That's actually for the consultant who charges a cost per use. But the task to which that consultant is assigned is Tendering Process Contract. We then have 3 tasks that have external resources assigned whose rates are in the range $25 to $50. And that's those 3 requirements: definition, analysis and design, and testing. So in that sense, you've sort of filtered tasks according to a resource grouping, but it's only in a sense, shall we say. Having said that, it can actually prove very useful to be able to use a grouping and apply it to assignments, either to the assignments within Resource Usage View, or if you're working on tasks and grouping tasks, you can use the same approach in Task Usage View and group the assignments in task usage according to a task grouping definition. So that's it on grouping. I will see you in the next section.